Shabbat Shalom. The best part of my visit to Israel was being together with my people, friends and family and strangers too. At moments like this, there is a palpable sense of achdut, a feeling of unity and oneness, togetherness. I experienced it even before I departed on my journey for Israel. On the way, I stopped in New York for a conference that I had helped plan months ago. We ended up changing it to sort of an online experience, but I went to New York anyway to see my daughters and a few friends. And I found out that the day before I was supposed to leave for Israel, there was going to be a large gathering outside of the United Nations to support families of those who had been abducted, who were coming to speak at the UN, including Rachel and John Poland Goldberg, friends of ours from our time in Jerusalem. So hundreds of us came out to advocate on behalf of the more than 200 Israelis and others who've been abducted by Hamas, demanding, as we chanted, to bring them home now. I felt that sense of achdut, that sense of togetherness, when I was asked to bring 5 huge suitcases full of supplies for soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, including headlamps and portable cell phone chargers, knee pads, hydration backpacks, and even, as I'll explain a little bit later, body armor. I felt this sense of achdut, this sense of togetherness, most keenly at the Hamalim that I visited. You might not be familiar with that word Hamal. It's an abbreviation in Hebrew that stands for Cheder Milchama. And they have set up all over Israel these Hamal Ezrachi, this kind of like a civilian situation room or a civilian war room, places where people can bring donations from baby strollers to cribs to diapers, clothing for families who've been displaced from their homes from both the south and the north. And it's also in a place where people come just to strategize and think about different ways that people can be supported. All over Israel, I felt this extraordinary desire to help, to contribute, to support. I visited one of these war rooms in a Bedouin village called Segev Shalom. And you should know that among the more than 1,400 people who were murdered on October 7th, there were Jews, Christians, Muslims, Arabs, Druze, Bedouin, people of different nationalities, including Americans, Russians, Thais, Filipinos. There were many Bedouin killed and injured in the south on October 7th, including soldiers who serve in the IDF. We also visited a hamal that was in a large conference room at the Royal Beach Hotel in Tel Aviv. This is one of the places where evacuees from the south have been brought. The particular people who were in the Royal Beach Hotel had come from Nativ HaAsara, one of the communities, actually the community that's closest to the Gaza border. And they had been relocated there, and in their pain, in their mourning, they came together to organize their own communal response to care for one another. I felt it, as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, so powerfully when I went to the synagogue where I was a member for many years, Kehilat Kol HaNeshama. Last Friday night, actually, services were held in the basement of the synagogue so that if in case there was a red alert, an air raid siren that was going to go off in the middle, they wouldn't have to run downstairs. So we just had our prayers right there. And my friends and other people in the community didn't know that I was coming. And so as people noticed that I was there, one by one, they came over to give me a hug and express their gratitude that I had come, and I was feeling the exact same way in return. But it means so much to know that you're not alone, to know that there are people who worry for you and care for you and think of you and pray for you. And that's why it's so important for you to keep reaching out. You don't necessarily have to jump on a plane and go there, but you can certainly pick up the phone. You can certainly write that email and send that text and just make sure that those people know that you're thinking about them each and every day. And what was really powerful and interesting is how this goes both ways. Because again and again on my visit, people express their concern for us here in America because they're reading about what we're experiencing. And they know that the horrendous uptick in anti-Semitism in our country, they're reading about what's happening and seeing pictures of what's happening on college campuses. And so my Israeli friends kept wanting to know, how are your daughters doing in school? How's Jacqueline doing? How is everybody holding up? How's your congregation? How is everyone? And it was just so beautiful that in their moment of need, they were worried about us. And so often we experience these difficult moments, whether in the diaspora or in Israel, but very rarely, I can't think of any experiences where we have gone through it simultaneously at the exact same time. What Israelis are experiencing, the horror that they are experiencing, and the fear that we are experiencing, the anxiety that we're experiencing both in witnessing what happened in Israel, but also wondering about our own place in this country, and I know that's true for Jews around the world. We're going through this at the very same time. But what's beautiful is we're also, this desire to help one another and support one another, that's happening at the same time. The outpouring of support throughout Israel and throughout the diaspora, certainly including our own congregation, is truly inspiring. And here's just one story of how the Jewish community is coming together to help support one another. The day before I was going to leave for Israel, you saw all those bags that I took with me. 3 of those bags I got in New York through a connection right here at Stephen Wise Temple. But the day before I was supposed to go, my niece reached out to me, and she had been studying in Israel on a Fulbright scholarship from the beginning of the school year, and the program's on hiatus. You should know that every single university in Israel right now, classes are not happening because the majority of the students have been called up to the army. So university classes are not happening at all. So a lot of graduate students and others left the country temporarily while this is going on. So my niece reached out and said that a friend of hers from her program wanted to know if her cousin could be in touch with me, see if I could take something to Israel for them. And so I said, well, of course, I'm at my bag limit, but I'll just pay to have another bag. So I got in touch with this woman, Naomi, and she told me on the text, she said, can you bring some ceramic plates to Israel for me? And you might be thinking what I was thinking in that moment too, which is now is not exactly the time to be bringing dishes to Israel. But I figured it couldn't be that. It had to mean something else. So I ended up talking to her on the phone, and it turns out that body armor is made of a special kind of ceramic that can provide protection. God forbid you're shot at. So because so many people were called up to reserve duty, the IDF didn't have enough of certain supplies. And in fact, one of the challenges I learned is that more than 100% of the people called up for reserve duty has reported, how is that possible? I'm not great at math or statistics, but that doesn't seem to make sense at all. And here's what makes sense, can help you make sense of it. Many Israelis who were not called up for reserve duty showed up for reserve duty. So not only did almost everybody who was called up, they get a special notice called the Tzav Shmone, which means you need to come now, drop everything you're doing and come up. So people came from overseas, people flew back to Israel from wherever they were in the world to fulfill their Tzav Shmone, but then a bunch of other people showed up as well, including my wife Jacqueline's former boss, Yitzchak Sokolov, who is 69 years old. He put on his army uniform and he drove his Jeep to Sderot in the south, and he said, I can drive, and you always need drivers to schlep people around. I'm here. Including my friend Adi's father, who I hope you can see right behind me, who's in his mid-70s. He put on his army uniform and he went back to duty at his community in Efrat to protect the community there. So that was just a side note about why there wasn't enough equipment, because everybody's coming back to serve. So this woman, Naomi, who I was in contact with, asked me to bring in these ceramic plates, this body armor, and it was not a really obvious story how the body armor got to me. And it ended up ultimately in the vest. Actually, I brought in 12 plates, so that's enough for 6 vests. So it ended up in the vests of 6 IDF soldiers. So her brother is in the reserves, And because of this massive call-up, he didn't have body armor. So then this was a few weeks ago, she sent the body armor to him. And then he said, hey, there's some other guys in my unit who also don't have body armor. Can you help them up? And before you know it, Naomi and some of her friends have set up a nonprofit, and they are raising funds to buy all sorts of important equipment for IDF soldiers. And over the last few weeks, using this network that they've set up, they've delivered 124 sets of body armor and 112 Kevlar helmets. So she knows what she's doing. She's got this down, and she lets me know that these plates are going to be delivered to my mother-in-law's apartment where I'm staying, and then I can put it in these bags, and I'll take it to Israel. So the plates that she found, the best armor plates in America, are manufactured, of course, in Detroit. So she's figured out a way to get the plates from Detroit to New York because there's a friend in the network who's willing to drive from New York to Detroit, pick up all the plates, and drive back because that's the fastest, cheapest way to get them. So he does that. The plates come to me. I jam them in all these bags, and I bring them to Israel. I had kind of a challenging time getting them through customs in Israel, but that's another story for another day. But think of all the ingenuity and all the different people helping one another so that this could happen for these soldiers in need. And this is the embodiment, the absolute embodiment of a value that I'm feeling so deeply now. And I think it's the value that's really driving all of this, a sense of arevut. And I want to talk a little bit about that word. The Hebrew word arevut comes from the root ayin, resh, bet. And I just want to explore some of the meanings of that word, because again, I think it's instructive, and I also think it's inspiring and uplifting, and we need that uplift right now. So to be an arev for another, that's the first use of the term I want to share with you tonight, is to be a guarantor. And it works exactly as you would imagine if you're signing a lease and you need someone to guarantee that if you can't make the payment, they'll make the payment for you. That person is an arev. And it's used in the Bible. It's used in modern Hebrew as well. The broader value that's animating it all in Hebrew is called arevut, which I already mentioned, which is a sense of obligation or responsibility for the other. Someone who's connected to us in some way and that ultimately has sort of a claim on us. They certainly, we act out that claim, that sense of arevut, in the way we treat one another. There's another meaning that I think is really interesting. That same word can mean to mix things up. To mix things up and kind of pull them together. And that Hebrew word, a mixture of this type, is called an irbuv. And think about all those different stories I already told you and how much those stories really exemplify that mixture. I mean, that's who we are as a people, a mixture of different cultures and experiences, different opinions and personalities. It's beautiful. And it's sometimes maddening, but if you're in Jewish community, you know it's never boring. And we have this shared history, and we have shared stories, and we have a shared destiny. And all of this is part of that big, beautiful irbuv, this mixture. And there's one more nuance of the word that I especially love. That same Hebrew root, ayin, resh, bet, can mean to make something pleasant or sweet, something that you would enjoy. And as I was looking at this earlier today, I saw in one of the dictionaries that there's a theory that the reason that root, ayin, resh, bet, can mean something pleasant is because if you mix things together just right, if you mix them together perfectly, it's pleasant. And of course, if it's not mixed together right, it can be the opposite. But think of a great cocktail. We could all use one of those right now. Think of a great, delicious dish. The way the ingredients come together, that mixture can make it pleasant and perfect. And a people can be that beautiful mixture too. Just the right amount of all these different components. And it's something that I think is so beautiful about the Jewish people, whose whole is considerably better than the sum of its parts. And those parts are pretty great too. But when you put it all together, it's extraordinary. And I saw this so clearly when I visited each of those chamals that I was talking about earlier, those situation rooms. At the main chamal in Tel Aviv, where I spent a couple of hours and then came back actually a few days later. I was so excited about the place. When I got there with my friend Jeff, they put us on box duty. We were responsible for taking these cardboard boxes and then cellophane tape and putting them together. And Jeff actually noticed that I gotta be honest, I don't want to brag, but he noticed I was pretty good at it. And I said, well, the reason is because I used to work for my grandfather in his vitamin store, and that was one of my jobs, was making the boxes and then filling the little containers with the vitamins and then putting the cap on the vitamins and putting all the vitamin bottles in the box and then delivering them. So I was pretty good at box duty. And we were at this for about 45 minutes, and I started to think about who it was that had decided to come and volunteer that day. Everyone was a volunteer. So in our little box group, we had an American rabbi, a tour guide and educator, a director of marketing, and a retired tech entrepreneur. And as I started talking to him, I was like, so what did you do in tech? And he was like, artificial intelligence. And I said, and that prepared all of us for making boxes today. And within about 10 minutes, we had it dialed in. We'd sort of perfected it. We had an assembly line going. And then there was another crew just about 20 yards away, and they were taking bags and bags of donated goods, sorting them, and then putting them into the appropriate boxes. The main Hamal, this one in Tel Aviv that I mentioned, is at the Expo Center in Tel Aviv, which is in Ganei Yehoshua, not too far from the train station by the university, if you've been to that part of Tel Aviv. And they put all of the boxing and all the different dividing of all the materials that have been donated down at the bottom floor of a parking garage, which made a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. One is you could drive your car in and drop things off. They could bring vans in and trucks, and they could pick up these boxes. It's also safe so that if the air raid siren goes off, all the volunteers are already downstairs. And we're down there, and it's just amazing the work that was going on. And there was a place to donate supplies for the IDF. There was a place to donate strollers and cribs and car seats and diapers and everything you can imagine. And I was reflecting on it, and there was a powerful and rather dark comparison that came to mind. And then I mentioned this to Jeff, and it was one of those moments where we were both like, whoa. So here we were, a few floors underground, doing beautiful, holy work. We were sorting donations to help people who've been displaced, Israelis, residents of Israel, guests of Israel, anyone in need, Jews and non-Jews alike. And then it just hit me that about 50 miles south of where we were doing this holy work, there's another underground complex in the heart of Gaza. And there were people who were doing the most unholy work imaginable. They had come together for acts of pure evil, planning acts of terror, as we said and we saw earlier, acts of terror that affected babies, children, whole families. A place where innocents were being held. As we were doing this work, innocents were being held in this other place. But I also found some comfort in this comparison, because I realized that there is a type of transcendent holiness that can come in this irbuv of ours, in this holy mixture, this beautiful mixture of the Jewish people. And there's strength that comes out of this irbuv, and there's beauty and grace and love as well. And even in these difficult times, and perhaps maybe even especially in these difficult times, I find something so beautiful and so, it's not enjoyment. It's not that kind of use of that word, ayin resh bet, but there's something perfect about that mixture that brings me a sense of comfort. We are in the most challenging, painful, and possibly most bewildering moment that the Jewish people has experienced, at least in my lifetime. The hatred, the evil, the anti-Semitism, the apathy, the voices who would attempt to make the victim into the perpetrator, it's almost too much to hold. And actually, let me just amend that last statement. It is too much to hold. What we are experiencing right now, what we are witnessing right now, is too much for any of us. And that's why there's so much trauma that we're experiencing and that our loved ones in Israel are experiencing as well. It's too much for an individual. But for us as a community, as a people, we have proven that we can hold anything. We are resilient enough to endure anything. We are brave enough and we are strong enough, if we face this terrible moment together, to get to the other side. Now, October 7th, almost exactly 4 weeks ago, was Simchat Torah, the day on which we complete our reading of the first 5 books of Torah, and then we begin again. And as we conclude our reading, traditionally we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek. And one way that this was once described to me by one of my teachers is that the first Chazak, which means strong, that's saying, Chazak, I'm strong. And then we say it again, we say, Chazak, you're strong too. V'nitchazek, and we will strengthen each other. I'll take my strength and your strength, and together we will be stronger still. And it's so beautiful. It's so perfect for this moment. It's so necessary for this moment. And this is why we've endured for so long and will continue to endure no matter the challenge. Everywhere in Israel today, there are signs, big banners that say what the banner at the entrance of our synagogue says, B'yachad ninatseach. And literally, you see it everywhere. One thing that my friend Jeff pointed out to me is we were driving through Tel Aviv, and there are these digital signs that tell you how many parking spaces there are in the parking garages nearby. Tel Aviv is famous for not having enough parking. And so it'll say, this lot has 22 spaces and this lot has 18 spaces. And when we were driving around Tel Aviv, it didn't say the spaces anymore. It just said, B'yachad ninatseach. All the digital signs said, B'yachad ninatseach. So what does that mean? Together, B'yachad ninatseach, we will be victorious. And it doesn't just mean in this war. It means together, we will be victorious. Somehow we will prevail. And we have, as President Biden, quoting Prime Minister Golda Meir, reminded us, we have no other choice. So we better get busy with that work. It's our collective responsibility to make sure that our beautiful people, all mixed together, gets through this. B'yachad ninatseach, Am Yisrael Chai.